right, hello everyone. Welcome to the 1883 Speaker Series. My name is Mike Wozniak and I serve as the Director for the Department of Leadership Development. Over the next 18 minutes and 83 seconds, we'll explore a new lesson in leadership and gain valuable insights to support both our personal and professional growth. For today's speaker, please join me in welcoming Associate Vice President, Chair of the Math Department, and Co-Chair of the UND LEADS Implementation Team, Dr. Ryan Zerr.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for being here. And before I, launch into what I want to say, I'll offer a few words of thanks. First of all, to Mike for, organizing the speaker series, inviting me to be part of it, and giving me that nice introduction. Thanks to all of you for being in attendance. I realize that, your time is valuable, so it's nice to see that you're giving me some of it. I have big shoes to fill, right? There have been a number of people who have been part of the speaker series already, and including some that I see in the audience already, and so I just hope I can live up to the expectations. So I think what I'd like to do is give you a little bit of a more extended introduction to myself, and in that way give you some examples of the sort of roles I've played and the ways I've had an opportunity to make some observations about what seemed to me to be effective leadership. So Mike mentioned I'm a professor in the Mathematics and Statistics Department, and I also, relative to leadership, serve as the chair of that department. And so in that capacity, I have the opportunity to work with a bunch of great colleagues to do what would be typically seen as pretty kind of fundamental work in making a university function, right? Classes that are high quality and faculty to teach them, giving students excellent educational experiences, I hope, answering their questions, helping them navigate the curriculum, ensuring that the faculty have the time they need to do the research that is their passion. And so it's a leadership role that's pretty fundamental to how universities operate, and probably has a lot of the elements that we would expect it to have. The other half of my job, roughly speaking, is, and again, Mike mentioned this, is as Associate Vice President. And in that role, I have the honor to work with a bunch of people across campus, right? So this is, at least in some sense, at the opposite extreme of the departmental leadership. I'm working on, and in fact, we see some of the elements of my work here today related to the strategic plan, UND LEADS, and working with individuals across campus on something that is much higher level, strategic direction of the institution, and so I just consider myself incredibly lucky to have those sorts of experiences. My educational background. I'm a mathematician, of course, but my undergraduate degree is not in mathematics, it's in atmospheric sciences. And so as I was thinking about what I would say today, I at least considered the possibility of using that experience as sort of a framing, at least for part of the talk. And so I'm thinking, whether it's stormy and turbulent and chaotic and unpredictable, and that might be an interesting way to frame and characterize leadership. But I didn't dwell on that framing for very long, because that's not really what leadership is typically like. I mean, occasionally, of course, there are going to be moments that are less smooth than you might want them to be, but I don't think it would be a particularly accurate picture for me to claim that it is chaotic and stormy in the ways that background might imply. So what I'll do instead is use my graduate degrees in mathematics as the primary framing for what I'll have to say. And if you think about the analog here, you might think that it imagines I'll talk about how leadership is orderly and formulaic, and that there's always a right answer, or that there's some sort of leadership arithmetic, right? Follow all the rules and you'll get to the right answer every time. I'm not going to do that either, however, because that would be equally inaccurate, I think. But what I will do is I'll note that there's more that connects how mathematics is done and how, in my opinion, good leadership is practiced than you might actually expect. You've heard lots of good advice from the others in this series, and so my claim is not to have, the right answer, of course, but my goal is to note a couple of characteristics that feel right to me and that have made it possible for me to navigate situations that have led to good outcomes. When I was a college student, like at least some of you, it looks like in the crowd, I would have seen myself as a pretty unlikely leader, at least in the stereotypical sense. I was pretty quiet, not generally one to put myself forward for front and center roles. But then when I began my graduate work in mathematics, I was assigned to lead class discussions for an algebra class, which is pretty typical, and I see some of the graduate students in math here, so they know the feeling. I'm not a front and center person, and yet here I am, literally front and center with all of these students' eyes on me. Well, I spent that semester mortified, truly, dreading the days of class meetings and always wondering and worried about how to manage being in front of people who were looking for me to know what to do. They were basically my age, and although I was certainly knowledgeable about the mathematical content, that's not enough in a situation like that. I also needed to know how to lead this group of people in learning a subject, and one that they probably felt was fairly difficult. So if one's notion of leadership is embodied by a self-confident and commanding presence in front of a group of people, I was 100% the opposite, unsure, nervous, and full of self-doubt. So this new experience, which was very painful, created space for me to practice two seemingly competing characteristics that I've come to associate with good leadership. And the first is embodied by words like perseverance and consistency. So in the context of this new leadership role, it was necessary to persevere through the anxiety and to be consistently prepared time after time to give the class what it needed. But more generally, I've become convinced of the importance of perseverance and consistency as important leadership traits. I mean, think about it. If one day your plan is to do A, and then the next day it's B, and a week from now it's C or something else, people will quickly lose confidence in your leadership approach. They won't know which direction to go in following your lead. Perseverance and consistency are also important for more mundane reasons. Things will occasionally become challenging. Having the stick-to-itiveness to carry on often makes all the difference in the world. The other characteristic that grew out of that, that initial mortifying experience relates to the ideas of adaptability and flexibility. And this may seem a bit at odds with perseverance and consistency, but in the context of the me standing in front of that classroom of students, I quickly came to understand that even though the plan for the day might have involved calculus, if all I'm seeing are blank stares, then clearly I need to change course and focus a little on something like algebra. This same phenomenon is true more generally. I mentioned a moment ago that a constantly shifting plan is not a recipe for leadership success. But consider the other extreme, a plan, maybe it's even a good one, that is followed to the letter regardless of how circumstances unfold. The ultimate goal should be consistently in mind, but if the path one takes to get there must shift to accommodate unexpected challenges, a good leader will alter course rather than stubbornly heading in an unproductive direction. Well, ultimately, I did make it through the experience of leading my first class, and although I certainly wasn't consciously thinking, be consistent, be adaptable, it's clear looking back that these are principles that have helped me navigate a variety of other challenging situations as well. I've since had many opportunities to be in front of classrooms of students, and in most of those instances, things that I've tried to teach them about mathematics have also been important for how I see leadership. This connection wasn't apparent to me until I began preparing for today, but I've come to see that characteristics that are embedded in what you might call my mathematical DNA have been critical in helping me lead effectively. So what are these parallels? What are the commonalities between how mathematics is done and some of the characteristics I believe embody effective leadership? Well, you're probably thinking this is a stretch, right? I mean, he's a mathematician, so he's trying to square peg into a round hole. But if you think about mathematics, it's about studying abstract objects like numbers and geometric figures, whereas leadership is about motivating people and organizations to accomplish goals and objectives. So what I'm saying isn't that they're equal, of course, but how one does mathematics is actually very similar to what most would see as the key characteristics of good leadership. And I'll illustrate the point through a couple of examples. The first relates to the idea of clear purpose and direction. So if you think about mathematical problems, from the homework problems that we've all seen to even research level questions, they require clarity about what the question is saying in precise terms. This involves knowing things like the setting. And so, the kind of the stereotypical word problem, right? Two trains traveling in opposite directions, right? Well, we need to know something about what direction and where are they heading, right? The setting for the problem. We also need to know the goal. Maybe in this case, it's determining where they meet and at what time. And then the constraints for the problem. Maybe the track can only accommodate one train at a time, and each train stops for 10 minutes at each station along the way. Well, in the same way that you need to understand that problem in these various precise ways, a leader is going to create clarity about where one is going and why it matters. They're able to understand the setting of the situation, maybe it's a big project, articulate a goal, maybe it's creating a policy, and help navigate the path to the goal by addressing the constraints, whether they're political or legal or cultural. So in both leadership and mathematics, failure may come from misspecifying problems. The other way that I've come to realize that leadership relates directly to the practice of mathematics concerns words like integrity and trustworthiness. Leadership involves trusting relationships. People are more likely to follow someone who is honest, fair, and consistent. Someone who can provide reasons for why actions are taken more than just by saying, because I said so. This is very similar to how mathematics is done. Think about your last math class. Were you asked to show your work? And if you were, it was probably to show more of it, right? This is the same idea. We show our work in mathematics to demonstrate believability. You might say the answer is 13, but why should I believe you? If you can explain your thinking, I'm likely to be able to get on board. As a leader, integrity and trustworthiness are absolutely critical. Success requires people knowing they can count on your actions being correct and believable, that you can explain why in a convincing way when a decision is made. Well, I bet when you came over today, you didn't think that all of those problems about planes flying with crosswinds and light poles casting shadows of certain lengths, or every time your teacher emphasized the importance of showing your work, that you were actually being kind of led along the path to good leadership skills. But here we are, and maybe in fact there was a lesson to learn in all of that for leadership. But not everything fits quite so neatly into this, math as leadership framing. And so I'll have one more point that I want to make that is much too important to leave off the list, and which doesn't quite fit so well as the others as kind of leadership as math. To illustrate the point, I'll use an example from early in my career. It had nothing to do with mathematics, just a typical university committee that I happened to find myself a member of. One of the long-standing members of the committee, someone who was always smart, very engaged, insightful, articulate, spoke up at one of the meetings to nominate me to be the following year's chair. Well, you're thinking this seems like a fairly trivial moment, but it stuck with me in what is now well over 20 years later. And it stuck with me because of how surprising I found it that someone would have noticed me and thought that I might have something to contribute in that way. I certainly felt flattered, but I was definitely scared and unsure as well. Well, the person who noticed me became a friend and a mentor. Her action, which may have seemed relatively minor at the time, was pivotal for helping me see myself in a way that I hadn't before. My point is that part of developing your leadership toolkit relates to how you receive others' support, that you notice what others do to help make you feel valued, what they do to cultivate the potential for leadership in you. This characteristic is not about what you do per se, but that you're open to how others' guidance and mentorship can position you to grow into roles that may seem out of reach. It's about considering how others in your life have helped to facilitate your growth and development, and how they've helped you grow into someone who will assume leadership roles. And then in turn, of course, as you grow as a leader, you should carry this forward in how you recognize and support others. In addition to the small example just noted, I've been incredibly fortunate to have many people mentor and guide me, treating me with respect and giving me reasons to think I had much more potential than I thought I had. Recognizing this, I realized that I can repay their trust and me by doing the same for others. And I encourage you to be on the lookout for those who guide and mentor you. And then in turn, you should adopt practices as a leader that will serve to guide and mentor others. For instance, help those around you achieve their best. Make it easy for others to do their job well by helping them rise to high expectations. Clear paths for them, creating environments that lead to success by helping them achieve hard things. Make it possible for them to thrive and realize their potential. You lead by elevating others. Praise and give credit. A leader helps those around them know that their contributions are valued. Create empowering environments by bringing people into the discussion regardless of role. Don't accentuate hierarchies, emphasize shared responsibility and the important role that everyone in the group plays. Well, as we approach the end of my 18 minutes and 83 seconds, although I'll admit as I'm looking at the clock here, it's not quite there, but as we approach the end of my time, keep in mind that whether you find yourself in circumstances that are stormy and turbulent or orderly and formulaic, some things to keep in mind as you assume leadership roles include being consistent and dependable while remaining open-minded, flexible, and adaptable. Know what the situation is and what you and your team are trying to accomplish by providing clear purpose and direction. Be clear about what's intended and why. Be able to explain your reasons for a decision or approach. Make sure that others can trust what you're asking them to do. And then, of course, here as I've ended, don't overlook the human elements. Repay the ways people have guided and mentored you by doing the same for others. Be kind, generous with praise, and empowering for those who are part of whatever shared projects you might undertake. And of course, through actions such as these, you'll lead through the good example that you set. And that will make you exactly the type of person that people will want to follow, and thus a true leader. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Zerr. And thanks to everyone for coming today. Join us on April 8th when we welcome the Director of Grand Forks Public Health, Tess Wall. Have a great rest of your week.